Sheba the tigress was euthanized in the early hours of this morning after breaking free of her enclosure in Walkerville, south of Johannesburg over the weekend. She roamed for about 4 days. She attacked a man who is still in hospital during that time. Now, tigers are not indigenous to Africa. They are an endangered species. So how does this animal come to be privately owned in South Africa? I'm joined now by Douglas Wolhuter, Wildlife Protection Senior Manager at the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Mr. Wolhuter, thank you so much for your time. Tell us a little bit more about tigers, where they actually do come from and how at risk they are.
Good evening, Sally. Yeah, tigers, they've got a number of home range states. You're looking, most commonly people know about the Bengal tiger, which is what Sheba was. She was a Bengal tiger. And yes, tigers are an endangered species, and they're heavily protected in terms of CITES. So CITES regulates your international trade of animals. So therefore, as a listed Appendix 1 animal, they have got very heavy restrictions to bring into any other country.
So with that in mind, how is it possible that Sheba and her male partner ended up in private hands? Is this all perfectly legal? Can you actually import an endangered animal, a tiger, and bring it to live in an enclosure?
Sally, it's a tricky one because I think since 2020 there are stronger regulations that, in terms of NEMBA, which regulate tigers being imported into South Africa. But especially in Gauteng, we've got a very unique situation where you would only need an import permit issued by the nature conservation authorities if you're bringing it into the province. So people have got quite clever and they are breeding tigers in Gauteng, so that enables you to bypass the permitting aspect. So people can quite easily own a tiger within Gauteng with very little regulation to cover it.
So in this particular case, I mean, we don't know too much about the owner, but was this a sort of a small game farm? Was this set up for breeding purposes? Can you tell us anything more about where Sheba was being kept?
She was actually being kept on more of a plot. So, a plot in a pretty, a semi-residential type of area. So, there's a big problem with keeping animals in such close proximity to people.
So is that allowed or not? Are there rules?
Again, it's a hard one. There's a set of rules, like your minimum fencing specifications, which in Gauteng apply to indigenous animals. So like for instance, a lion. A lion in Gauteng, you have to have 100,000 hectares to keep lions. But because tigers are exotic, the same provisions don't apply to them. So, but the burden of proof, I guess, comes down to the owners actually know that this isn't a dog or a cat. They know that there's got to be more stringent security measures in place. And that's kind of where you've got to start looking, because if you haven't got that in place, that in itself is extremely negligent. So there is, as we say, we're continuing our investigation into this matter as well.
Okay, so you were explaining to me how tigers are actually being bred in South Africa, and that's why it's kind of easier to get one. Do you know how Sheba came to be in South Africa? Is she from another bred tiger in South Africa, or do you know if she was an import?
No. Look, we don't know too much about the origin. We've heard stories about her and I think the other tiger was Tyson, having been rescued. Unfortunately, we get many rescue stories whenever we do investigations. But we believe that they were both locally sourced within South Africa. I can't say which province though.
Sure. And how big is tiger breeding? And is it actually legal in South Africa to breed tigers?
It is legal to breed tigers in South Africa because if you look at the CITES, the Convention on International Trade, that only pertains to international trade. So therefore, because tigers don't have indigenous status within South Africa, they're quite easily able to be bred with very little restriction. There's some provinces which have extremely good ordinances in place which control these animals. Western Province, for one, you've got to have a permit to own any exotic animal within South Africa, within that province. So where there are good regulations, then we're not seeing what we're seeing here, especially in Gauteng.
So how would you like to see the regulations change in Gauteng? What do they need to change towards?
Well, I think we've got to look at the bigger picture, because right now everybody's focused on a tiger or tigers in the backyards. What we've got to consider is the incredible influx of exotic animals within South Africa. It's a huge trade. And the problem that you're seeing is you're seeing rattlesnakes coming, and you're seeing very venomous creatures coming into as pets, which we don't necessarily have anti-venom or anything to treat these animals. So in my view, we need to start looking at it kind of like a dangerous species regulation, which makes it really difficult to own these animals. And more so, there should be an absolute prohibition on these sort of dangerous species within residential areas.
Absolutely. How is it that Sheba was shot, because she had to be euthanized? I understand she was shot dead. When she's endangered, I mean, surely if you can shoot her with a gun, you can shoot her with a sedative.
Yeah, there was a set of parameters which had to be considered with that. And because whenever you dart an animal, it does take quite a while for the sedation to take effect. You can also get a period of excitement once the darting happens, which could cause more damage, an attack on a domestic animal or on people. So because of the proximity of the people residing there and the other animals, allegedly the decision was taken to shoot her rather than dart her, which is sad, because we've had a lot of people coming to the fore, people like the Aspinall Foundation, who offered helicopters today they offered a helicopter for 4 hours, flying at very low heights to flush her and to sedate her. But unfortunately, it's all in vain now.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, you've raised so many crucial and important issues around exotic animals and how and why they are kept here in South Africa. Thank you so much for your time, Douglas Wolhuter, Wildlife Protection Senior Manager at the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals.